right, guys, happy Tuesday, and we are back on the Ravit Show. Very happy to have my next guest today, Dr. Jennifer Prendki, as the guest on the Ravit Show. Jennifer is the founder and CEO of Alectio, the first startup focused on data prep ops, which is a term she coined in January 2021. We'll be talking a lot about it today. She has also led many ML projects and is recognized as one of the top industry experts in active learning and machine learning lifecycle management. Today we will discuss about her journey about AI space, active learning, data prep ops, and much more. So keep your questions ready. I am sure it will be a lot of fun because I have prepared some amazing questions for her. And not only that, what we are doing is for you guys, we'll be giving away 365 data science annual subscription. What you need to do is you need to type hashtag 365 data science in the comment section, and you will be opting up for the free giveaway. What you need to do is, again, just quickly type 365 data science in the comments, and you'll be up for the raffle, and we'll be announcing the winners by end of the show. But without any further ado, let's have Jennifer here. Hey, Jennifer, welcome to the Ravit Show. How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Ravit. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you today. And I was just letting folks know about your journey, about obviously you have started your company Electio, and it's the first startup that focuses on data prep ops. So which is obviously a term which you bought in January 2021. We'll want to know more about it. But before that, for our audience, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Jennifer. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm French originally. I mean, one of the fun facts about me is like I'm an ex-particle physicist, like reconverted into a machine
Yeah.
learning scientist. And so a lot of what I do today is like comes back from like the ages like back then where I was working with like a mountain of data. And back in the days when I was doing my PhD, there was actually like no cloud compute available. We didn't have GPUs. So we had to be very smart with the data we're using. And so I'm trying to like bring the concept to the industry, which is basically like a part of the story of the company and my own journey.
Wow, fantastic. And talking about your early journey, I know you started Electio a few years back, but what before that? What were you doing exactly, and how did you come up with this idea of leaving your full-time job? And what motivated you to start Electio? And because it's obviously a very you have that risk factor,
Yeah.
and it's a very big decision. So can you tell us more about it?
Absolutely. So I mean, like I had kind of like an interesting, pretty like fast like move across like my career, right? But basically, so I had like a couple of like very interesting positions, like my first like managerial role where I had to deal with budgets and so forth and so on was at Walmart Labs, and so that's like the first time I faced problems where we had like very large budgets for data preparation, for data labeling, for compute, and so forth and so on. Every single time my data scientists were complaining that we don't have enough, like they had to wait in line in order to train their models on our on-prem instances and so forth and so on. So I kept fighting for like more and more budget, and so I started realizing like, man, like the fact that we're using so much data without necessarily knowing if this data impacts the training process of our models, it's not necessarily very smart. So later on, like the same story happened like a couple of times. So I was lucky enough to basically start the machine learning function at Atlassian. So I was the first like head of data science, like slash data science, like chief data scientist over there. And so same stories, like very large amounts of data, and so nowhere enough like compute or the resources to basically like manage all of this data properly from a data science machine learning perspective, right? And so eventually I got poached by Figure Eight, which most people know as Crowdflower. So that's one of the big labeling companies that usually people are fairly familiar with. And so I was like, maybe it's time like to take this like problem seriously. I completely fell in love with the problem of like how do you build a machine learning model with just a fraction of the data. And so luckily in my previous jobs I had built a couple of solutions which worked really well, right? And yeah, I mean, so at some point like like I usually like people make fun of me because I always say everywhere that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I never planned to start my own company. That wasn't a dream of mine or whatever. But like I reached a point where there was a clear need on the market. I was worried about where the market was going, like without a proper solution. And so we can talk about that a little bit later as well. But so
Yeah.
I was like, like this opportunity, like nobody's doing anything about it. The market needs it. I know it's crazy, but I'm gonna do it anyways. So
Yeah,
this is how it
exactly.
started.
Yeah, it's obviously it is one of the decisions and it is a little funny when you say it's accidental you became an entrepreneur, but definitely once you start with it, I know for sure that there are many responsibilities and it's an ever evolving I think role, not only a role, but there are many responsibilities when you have employees, so I can only imagine. So, moving ahead, obviously we have a few folks joining in. Let's just greet them. We have Shruti Jain here. Hey, Shruti. We have Nelson joining in. We have Abhinitha. Hello. So, all the folks are ready. Please feel free to ask questions today. And yes, don't forget to hashtag 365 Data Science to win annual subscription. So, Jennifer, I know for a fact that you talk a lot about AI winter, and I've heard you a lot in multiple talks. Talking about AI winters. What's that all about? Because that's a new term. After you coined something, like data prep ops. Obviously, AI winters was also new for me. But so, can you tell us more about it?
No, absolutely. So, I mean, going back to what I said earlier, so I told you like I was getting really worried, and I like the reason why I was getting worried is like
Yeah.
I was worried about the next AI winter. So, it's not a term that people talk a lot about the industry, but it's not the first time it happened. Basically, like if you replay the story of AI and deep learning and so forth and so on, like that's usually a story I like to tell at conferences, right? I mean, so
Mhm.
the basically like some of the most fundamental like algorithms and mathematics like behind like everything that we use today, right? I mean, backprop and so forth and so on, like the early like like understanding of like
Yeah.
like how you would build a deep learning model, it goes back from the 40s, right? I mean, and so when you look at the history, you always have like a huge spike of research, new findings,
Mhm.
and then you have a period of like 15, 20 years where people stop altogether, and typically they stop because the hardware is not where it needs to be, right? I mean, so basically like one of the first problems, like the sort of like winter that they saw in the 50s, for instance, was basically due to the fact that even though they knew how to build a deep learning model from a theoretical standpoint, nobody could train it, right? I mean, because we didn't have like powerful enough computers, and we're just like starting to our journey like to building GPUs and so forth and so on. And so every couple of months, like you had a couple of years, you had like people doing amazing research. You have like
Mhm.
computer vision, like was like a lot of the theory was like put in place also in the 60s and 70s. It's only now we're seeing this, right? I mean, so an AI winter is basically like a period of like dryness from a research industrial standpoint, from an
Mhm.
AI perspective, where people just drop everything they're doing because people are not investing in it anymore, etc., etc. And so when you go to today, right? I mean, so there is no question we've done a lot of things in the past 10 years. People are excited about it. Yeah, it feels like now this is not going to happen anymore, right? And so
Yeah.
one of the things I noticed is like, if you look at the state of the art today, like what is going on, right? Companies are investing millions of dollars into like AI projects. At the
Right.
same time, when you read the news about AI, you always see everywhere people say like, we're not seeing a return on investment. Like we spend so much money, but we're not getting
Mhm.
money back from there, etc. So there is a true risk that all of these companies that have put up so much money, even VCs and investors to some extent, will say like, look, we're not ready for AI. AI, like we understand the technology, like from a technological standpoint, we're pretty mature, but it's not helping our business. We're just going to drop it, right? And so if
Right.
this happens at scale, you're going to see the next AI winter where people are going to wait a little bit, like a couple of years or maybe a decade before we move on to the next stage, right? So what
Mhm.
would cause an AI winter right now? My answer to that is big data. and from a more like general standpoint, operations. Why? Because when you look at the investments, like if you're a startup, you have $1 million like, that you just raised like to start your own company, like you can easily like spend 70-80% of that money on like compute, AWS, GCP hardware, right? I mean, and data labeling, like storage,
Yeah.
and so forth and so on, instead of putting that money into the research part. And so this is causing a lot of projects not to be profitable, right? Because if you spend
Right.
80% of your money on this, even if you get some return on investment, the return on investment is kind of narrow and small compared to the amount of money that was invested, right? So
Yeah.
one of the missions of Alectio, if not the most important mission of Alectio, is like if you can do things with less data, you can shrink dramatically all of those costs, right? I mean, and so the hope is
Wow.
that you can train the same machine learning models with just a fraction of the data, which would save you like on compute, on storage, on like data labeling, data preparation, and so forth and so on. So I think this needs to be streamlined before
Yeah.
it's too late. And basically, like the business people say, like I don't believe in AI being like something important for my business anymore.
Mm. No, I think it totally makes sense because when you talk about millions and millions that have been invested into AI, but what are the results? Because what I have heard from the tech giants is you see more than 70% of the AI projects fail. So that kind of aligns with what you are talking here about the AI
Yeah.
winter. So totally it does make sense. But also coming back and talking about AI, how optimistic are you that the AI space is going in the right direction? Do you think it will be a game changer in the future? Because we've always heard since years now that AI will it will actually replace human, which is obviously very cliche, but still, what do you think about it?
No, I mean, look, like the reason why I'm doing this is like I'm hopeful and I believe we can do amazing things. Generally
Yeah,
speaking, I'm also like I don't necessarily think from an application standpoint we're focusing on the right things, right? I mean, because as we all know, there is a lot of investment in autonomous driving, which is great because I'm sure it can make like people like a lot safer. But like at the same time, like I think there are bigger problems to solve than helping people
right.
drive their cars, right? I mean, so I mean, I think like to some extent, like I like to see the AI industry focus more like the deep important problems. People talk about like I mean climate change, like
Yeah,
upcoming food crisis globally, and so forth and so on. Like there are tons of application from like an elderly care standpoint, healthcare standpoint, etc., etc. So I mean, at the same time, I think we're sort of getting there. I see more and more applications in agri-tech and yeah, a lot of like more, like I would say like game-changing sort of applications. And I'm hopeful as well that, like when I started the company, it's like, how am I going to convince the entire industry that they truly can do a better job with less data? Because if I don't do that, there is a true chance that, like companies are just going to sink all of their money in like sustaining like the huge amounts of data that they're generating, right? I mean, so basically like people see like data is the new oil, etc., etc. And so it's like just like storing everything. And so the first year was really tough because I didn't really have a lot of support. You would talk to a customer, the customer would basically say like there is no way I can show you the same model with less data, where like in reality it's not about volume, it's about variance. And so people who actually like work with this on a daily basis, like while they know it, it's like, like I mean, I call that the big data lobby, but there is a big data lobby out there. And over time, like now we're starting to get more support. Like for example, like Edgewing like started talking about like the need of AI to move past the idea of big data. That's something that just came out recently. So
wow.
this is definitely helping us on our mission.
No, I think definitely it does make a lot of sense when you say that because I think smart data versus the big data, it's always going to be the smart data, and that's the future, I feel. But obviously, it's not going. What what do you think? Will it take some more time for people to get there and understand that smart data is the thing, and it might be much more helpful?
Like I think there is a true need, right? Because typically, like when we speak to like
Exactly.
users, customers, like typically you see people as like, my budget is like 10% of what I can afford. What am I gonna do? So it's kind of like pressuring people into like starting adopting this. But I mean, it
Mm.
depends on the level of maturity of the company, right? I mean, usually the companies that have had like models in production for a couple of months and they realize every month it costs them like X amount of dollars to like retrain, maintain, like reannotate like new data that's coming in at some point, like like things have to change. They know it. They're looking for a solution. So I think like the monetary pressure, it's kind of like forcing this idea on the market anyway. So I mean, and then it's not a moment too early for sure.
Yeah. No, I think definitely it does make sense. We have a few questions in the audience. I would love to take this question very quickly. In terms of the diversity, did you face any imbalance in the tech world? Very interesting question.
From what? From like a starting my own company perspective, I assume.
Yeah, I think it's more on
Yeah.
the lines where diversity, maybe gender diversity, and
Yeah.
starting your
Yeah,
own
no, no,
company.
absolutely. So, no, look. So, I mean, since we're gonna talk about this topic, anyways, right? I mean, so I have a lot of things playing against me starting a company, right? I mean, because like I'm a solo woman founder, right? I mean, I'm an immigrant. I mean, that's not always easy to like
Oh
get
my
things done in the industry with this, right? I mean, so it's like I mean, I have a couple of like you could call that horror stories. When you look back, it's actually kind of funny. But like when I started fundraising, like for my first round at the very beginning, like people would tell me like, you absolutely need to hire a male CTO, otherwise nobody's gonna
God.
listen to you, and so forth and so on, right? I mean, so it's like, I mean, obviously, like, what kind of like drive me, like, for like, or drove me throughout the entire process is basically like, I mean, it's a little bit cliche, but I often think about like, like if I can make it happen, like I'm making it easier for like the next generation to think like this is an option that they have to start and so forth and so on. But like, yes, absolutely. Like you, like even just like talking about fundraising, right? I mean, people are like,
Mhm.
you come up with an idea, you have like somebody coming up like with a similar idea, but like free male founders out of like a top US
Wow.
university and so forth and so on. Like usually, like it's pretty clear where the money is gonna go, right? I mean, so at the same time, I would say like the way you get like you move forward is like by surrounding yourself with the right people. There are people out there willing to help as well. So I have like sort
Yeah.
of my fan club like supporting me. So it's
Wow.
made things easier. But like yeah, I mean it's 2021. It's still not easy for like a woman like to start her own company. Like I mean, look,
Mhm.
solo founder is never easy for anyone, anyways. Like, but I mean, there are like additional like complexities on the like process and the road that come from
Yeah.
the fact that I'm a woman, and so yeah, you have to deal with that as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's part and parcel, but at the same time, how you look at it, and I think the challenges that come your way keeps you moving and gives you more power to make strides in that tech field
No,
and that you're doing.
absolutely. To some extent, like I mean, sometimes I wish I didn't have to think about this, but like like anytime, like
Totally.
I'm like I don't know if I should, like like I want to give up or whatever. It's like if I give up, I actually have a lot of like younger like women engineers, data scientists who look up to me, and basically like I don't want them thinking like
Oh
if she
yes.
didn't make it, like I can't. And basically like like set like the like set barriers like even higher for them in the future. I feel like I cannot afford for this to happen, so it just keeps me moving. Right?
No, totally. I can only imagine, but that's the best thing, where you keep your motivation up, you keep your head up, and you just keep moving. So fantastic, Jennifer. And another question I would love to take, it's from Facebook. Hello, great going. Are you taking any help of statisticians for analyzing data?
So the way we do things, right? I mean, so I think we could talk about like like how our platform functions, right? I mean, so as you probably
Yeah,
guess, we can talk about data prep ops, which is like the wider concept we
definitely.
focus on. But so very fundamentally, in terms of like what we actually look at, right? I mean, so I started the company as a data curation company, right? And so curation isn't even such a standardized term, or you could talk about data selection or whatever, right?
Mhm.
The fundamental idea is like any training data set is in fact made of useful, useless, harmful data. It's sort of like simplistic way to look at things. But so you have part of the data that contains the information that's going to help the model learn. And it's not necessarily like the most obvious data that's going to do that, right? You have what I call useless data, which is either redundant information or irrelevant information. So you throw that into your model is not going to do poorly because of this. You're just wasting your time or your money. And then you have like the harmful data, which is like corrupted data, mislabeled data that's like throwing the model into like a state of forgetfulness. Like forgetfulness is a concept we look a lot at, right? I mean, which is basically like it's like when you prepare for your exams, you thought you understood the problem, and then you read one more book, and you're like, now I feel I don't know anything anymore. So the same thing happens to models, right? And so if you can throw away like the harmful data, you can hopefully get a better model. If you throw away the useless data, you should get things done faster and better, right? So typically, like for like computer vision use cases, we can get like 20-30% of the data to be truly useful and truly impactful on the model. So basically, you can get rid of the rest and get a better model with like substantially less data. And so going back to your question, so we don't analyze the data the way you think about it. What we do is we actually don't look at the data. I know it sounds crazy, but so basically like what we do is like there is like the customer's data goes in the customer's model. We have an SDK that wraps around this, and it sort of acts like an orchestration system that basically like subselects like subsets of the data that we deem to be relevant, but we observe what's going on. So when I say we observe, we're basically looking at like the loss function. If it's a deep learning model, we look at all of the variations in the parameters of the model, just like there were time series, right? I mean, so basically, like if you can like analyze like the lack of stability of the model and so forth and so on. And so and on top of this, so we're going to talk about active learning as well, but basically, like fundamentally, we're using this active learning process to sort of like guide like the process dynamically, right? So we have like some sort of like generation of like clues. I call that the model's body language. So when a model learns, and especially when a model learns in an incremental manner, you can observe what's going on, right? I mean, so basically, like it's like I put like electrodes on your brain right now to try to measure your brain activity and basically guess whether you're happy or you think this is interesting. So basically, we do that for a machine learning model, and so that data, like the clues and the body language that's generated by the model, we treat that as our data, right? So that has many benefits because number one, we're not biased by the data. At no time people would say like we wouldn't tell a customer, oh, this data is useful because the picture looks pretty, looks useful, and so forth and so on. So you completely get rid of like any like confirmation bias you could have if somebody had to do this manually. It works on a wide range of different problems because from our perspective, it doesn't matter if this is NLP, if this is like computer vision or something else, right? And yeah, I mean, so basically, like we sort of like build machine learning models that analyze the model's body language and the model's like like activity, right? I mean, and yeah, I mean, so we're not doing it the way you expect. Like we don't have like statisticians just look at like the impact, like and it's better because like for another reason as well is basically like privacy, right? I mean, so we're not actually like invasively looking at the data, which is like super important when you work with like healthcare companies or companies that don't really own the data that they're working with.
I think definitely it is something which is very different, and it's not something what one might look like. It completely has a different function. And also, since we were talking about this model, Chelsea says she loves that model that has a body language. So yeah. Okay, moving on. Before I take my next question, there was an interesting question from Sonia. How can smart data be utilized in finance field? What do you say?
So I mean, I don't like I don't think it's like more useful for like like financial field or not, but like I can tell you how this can be used, right? I mean, so
yeah,
fundamentally, so if you go back to like the technology that we provide, like deep down, what we're trying to do is like sort and rank data by order of usefulness, right? I mean, so you can see that as being like almost like a classification problem, like useful, useless, harmful data. But we truly, like, the way it happens is like we rank it, right? I mean, so it's like
Right.
this data is more useful than this, right? I mean, so the most natural application that a lot of users see in this is that if you have only 30% of your data which is useful, and you know you're reaching the point where the rest of the data is either useless or harmful, you can save a ton of money on compute, you can save on training time, you can save on data labeling and so forth and so on. So for typical users, right, I mean, and specifically people in computer vision and NLP that rely a lot on the data labeling and so forth and so on, that's a fairly natural application, right? Now, there are many other applications, even in fields where data labeling isn't important. So typically in finance, right? I mean, if you look at the stock market, you don't really need to get that annotated. So again, you can have the same benefits where if you throw away the harmful data, you will get a better model. So it's also like sort of counterintuitive, because you're changing the distribution of the data, right? I mean, because like by removing the harmful data, what you're truly saying is like like the natural distribution of the data is not necessarily the best for a model to learn. To give you an example, like for autonomous driving examples, for example, like we have cases where the model learns better from low density data where you don't have a lot of pedestrians, but then it does really well on inferring on like high density like data. So even if your data has only images where the maximum number of pedestrians is 5, you can still do a good job at predicting at 20. So even if the distributions are different between the test and the train, it still does a good job. This is something that people didn't have an understanding of at first, right? But so going back to this, right? I mean, so cost saving, obviously, you throw away the harmful data, you get a better model, you get a boost in performance. The other super important application that I think like people are sort of neglecting when even like working with like regular active learning is understandability of the data. So basically what you can do is like, once you know this part of the data makes more sense or is more impactful, more useful to a specific model, you can basically start to understand what helps you, right? I mean, and so some companies, for instance, use that to say like, oh, this is the type of data I need more of, right? I mean, so for an autonomous vehicle company, it's like, now I know where I need to drive more frequently because I know like the data, like people typically know like data on highways is not helping so much, but you can very specifically say this street at this time of day is typically like something that makes the model like get a better boost in performance, right? So the same thing is true for any sort of data where you can sort of control like which part of the data goes into the system, which part of the data you should be using, and so forth and so on. And then reciprocally, like what you can do is like you can also understand the model, right? I mean, so if you know, for instance, there's 30, 40, 50% of the data that was not useful, that was harmful to the model, and then you realize all of that data has like some specificity or whatever, you might realize your model is underfitting, right? I mean, you might realize that the model needs to be changed for, like under feature, like for example, like people realize like for facial recognition use case, all of the images that are harming the models are pictures where people have glasses. You're basically, oh, I'm probably missing a layer where like because the model doesn't have sufficiently enough time to understand glasses, right? I mean, something like this. So it's really like fundamentally it's a tool that gives us like more lift to like better understand how to open the black box to some extent, right? Or like how which part of the data impacts the model, how, and basically like be more strategic about which features you're going to use, which data you should collect more of, which data you should focus on. And so traditionally, like this idea of like actively learning a model, the main application was like reducing on labeling cost, when in reality there are like tons of other applications.
Wow. Since we are talking a lot about data here, obviously, the first time that I had heard was about plastic. Data is the new plastic was from you, Jennifer. Since we were, I think it was the first time when you mentioned about it. So, can you tell us more about what is data is the new plastic?
No, I mean, so this is like an old pun where basically like I was at a couple of conferences like in 2018, 2019, and like everybody was like, data is the new oil, right? And so, I mean, like I don't really like the analogy, generally speaking, because like again, it's like necessarily like data is making money to people, which is kind of the opposite of like what I see most of the time, right? I mean, the more
Yeah.
data you're gonna have, the more like liability this represents to you. So I started thinking like, what is a good analogy of like something that, look, number one is like, there is no question that data is what helps us move technology, right? Because you wouldn't have all of these applications without data. Going back to my winter, like AI winter stories, right? Part
Right.
of the AI winter stories were basically like, we didn't have the means to collect sufficiently enough data. What changed in 29, like in 2009 to 2010 was basically like suddenly like people made like ImageNet was the first example of like a large scale annotated data set that people could use. Boom, suddenly you have lots of people doing research on this and you see like a boost in your
Right.
applications, right? I mean, so data helps technology, and data is the reason why machine learning moved so quickly in the past decade. At the same time, data is a liability, and it is a liability from an environmental standpoint as well, because you put this data in like data warehouses, like we keep building like data centers, etc., etc. It generates a lot of electricity, right? I mean, so basically, like if you want to train a model, you're gonna have to power up like your GPU machines, regardless of whether it's your own or it's actually like a cloud compute that you're using like from another company. Like there's always like a ton of electricity like involved in this. So what is harmful to the environment but helped like like technology move forward, generally speaking, like in the 20th century? Plastic, right? I mean, so I actually think like this is the best analogy. Is like basically like
Got
just
it.
like plastic. It's like we made progress thanks to this, but like now we don't know what to deal, like how to deal with it, just like we don't know how to deal with all of the plastic we're generating, right?
Very true. Before jumping on, obviously, to active learning part, because we'll be talking a lot about that too. Sarabjit had a comment for you that says there are no analogies from analog world which fit the digital world.
That's sort of true, yes. So,
Yeah. Okay. And one last question that I would want to take up around data is from Nishim. How can AI be trained to treat PII data?
how AI can be trained to like treat PII data. So I mean, it depends what you mean by treat, but basically like like what I mentioned earlier, like one of the reasons of like why we created the technology the way we did, right? Because I was interested in curation. There was a way to like do curation by looking into the data. Like I actually like believe like strongly that another crisis that's coming at us is data privacy. Like we've all seen like challenges we've been facing with GDPR, which is completely right. Like privacy by design should be like integrated and embedded in the way that we do machine learning, right? I mean, so yeah, I mean, so basically one answer to that question is like basically like more fundamentally, can AI be respectful of privacy, right? I mean, the answer is yes. One of the things we're trying to do like is exactly that. We actually never move the customer's data and the customer's model to our side. We're just observing. Like
Right.
basically just the same way, like going back to my analogy, like if I put like electrodes on your brain, right? I mean, I'm not that invasive. I'm just like, I don't know what you're thinking. I just know whether you're upset, generally speaking. Of course, people are gonna say like, maybe I can reproduce your thoughts by taking your brain waves or whatever on my system, but like that's typically not the case, right? No, and the other thing is like, I mean, obviously like AI, like there are tons of applications for like that's actually one of the fundamental like applications we see a lot of, is like, how do you remove like license plate numbers from like autonomous driving stuff and so forth and so on. It's not a harder problem than anything else, right? It's essentially like a like in NLP, it's like an entity detection problem to just like remove the PII. But so, I mean, I think the fundamental question here is like, should data scientists like try to adopt more like solutions where we are not invading with our like users' data and so forth and so on. There are ways to do this. I strongly believe like there is a lot of research to be done in like federated learning as well. I mean, so
Oh,
if you
yes.
haven't like brought somebody to talk about federated learning like on your show, you should definitely do that. But so I mean, that's also like one of the big things I anticipate like is gonna get big in the next 10 years.
Yes, fantastic. Thanks for that answer. I just want to remind folks who are joining us just now that we are giving away annual subscription of 365 Data Science. So don't forget to uh, mention hashtag 365 Data Science in the chat, and we will announce the winners by end of the show. Okay, moving on to active learning. So, Jennifer, obviously, I know you are probably the one of the most prolific speaker on this topic, active learning in the industry. Can you give us quick explanation on what active learning is and how does it work and how do you apply it in your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, basically, like, so first and foremost, so active learning is not something that's completely new. So, basically, that's something I was like sort of like exploring, like back to my days at Walmart. And so, fundamentally, so there is a lot of hype nowadays on what active learning is, right? I mean, so it's actually like fundamentally, if you go back into what it is, so it's a semi-supervised learning technique, right? I mean, so maybe I'll start by saying what it's not, right? A lot of people see active learning as like a process to generate labels or to label data. That's not what it is. If it has anything to do with data labeling, it's actually selecting which data you should annotate, right? Which is sort of like the easy version of what we try to do, right? But so basically active learning is like a supervised, semi-supervised learning technique. The definition of semi-supervised is only part of your data is annotated, right? I mean, so it's like sort of like a best of both worlds between like supervised and unsupervised. And so compared to like what people see as like regular supervised, where like you synthetically generate data, you just use an incremental learning process to identify which data you should annotate. So the first time people use this was like kind of a similar problem, too much data to annotate. How do I know which part of my data is going to be the most impactful so that I can strategically annotate the right data, right? So the way it works, it's actually pretty like you start with the same type of models. It's like it's just like basically like the training paradigm that sort of changes. So basically what you do is like you select part of your data, right? I mean, so normally when you start, you don't really have a choice but to randomly like select like a subset of your data. If you're more sophisticated, you can basically say like you do some sort of clustering to enforce like a even distribution in your data. And you start training, let's say, with 1% of your data, if your data set is really large. Now, you don't have any hopes your model is going to be awesome with 1% of the data. That's not the question. But basically, what you do is like after this selection phase, you annotate this 1%, you train with this 1%. And so the typical active learning is basically to say, like, now I have 99% of my data set, which I haven't used yet, which I'm going to use to sort of validate what's going on, right? I mean, so now you can't really call that a validation process. You normally call that an inference process where you use the model you have to run inferences. You have no way to know if your predictions are correct because again, it's not annotated because you only have this first 1% that has been annotated so far. So you can't say the model is struggling to make XYZ prediction because it was predicted as a cat, but it truly is a dog, right? What you can do though is like look at the peripherals, right? I mean, so what typically like the easiest way to do active learning is to say like, if the prediction was made with a low confidence, basically it means that the model has been struggling making this prediction, and basically like you should probably consider that this data needs to be selected next, right? I mean, so assuming this works, and I'll tell you it doesn't work in most of the cases because that's a very simplistic like way of like selecting things. But if your data set is simple enough, it might. It doesn't work in production. That's the biggest problem, right? So basically, you're gonna take the additional 1% where look, the confidence of the prediction was the lowest as a signal that this is how you want to keep building your data set. So the short answer is like it's a dynamic training process which you use to like sort of guide your training process into picking data that's strategically the most beneficial to the model, right? The model you build the same way. It's just like your machine learning model. Typically you do that if you already have a machine learning model and you keep training with additional data, right? I mean, or something that you know to work, like nobody's advising you to basically like tune your model during the process as well, even though this is something we're starting to do, right? And so yeah, I mean, so basically that's something you can try. There are like open source libraries that allow people to do this, and yeah, I mean, so now we can talk about like why it doesn't work, right? I mean, or like why oftentimes it doesn't work. So like yeah, I mean, if you want me to go there, so basically like imagine a situation where you have like you're doing sentiment analysis on English tweets, and for whatever reason, like your data isn't clean, which is expected to be true in the industry anyways, right? You're gonna have like, let's say 7% of your data set which is in a foreign language, and let's say in German, in French, and God knows what, right? If you run a prediction against those examples, you're gonna have a low confidence, not because the data is harder for the model to learn, but just because the data doesn't belong here, right? So if you use this low confidence process, what's going to happen is like you're going to enrich your data set with the worst data possible within your data set. You're just going to select the data that's in a foreign language, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do, right? I mean, so what we sort of do, and what is like basically like the proprietary technology that we're offering, is basically like a number one, you can't just look at confidence, you have to look at a wider range of different clues, which goes back to like my model body language, right? I mean, you want to analyze everything at the same time, because some people, like usually you expect people to scratch their head actually means that they're confused, but for some people it might not be the case. You cannot generalize, right? I mean, so it's the same thing here, right? I mean, so in some cases, like number two, the regular active learning, which I just described, like the way you select the data is number one, brute force. Number two, arbitrary, right? Why would you use confidence as opposed to something else, right? So by looking at the entire like set of clues and treating this as a machine learning problem, you have the answer, right? I mean, that's basically what we fundamentally try to do, right? I mean, so we guide the process instead of using a brute force, arbitrary, like a process which highly depends on the type of data, on the type of model, and so forth and so on. We treat everything as a machine learning problem. So it's actually pretty cool when you think about this. Like the way I think about what we're doing is like, you know how GANs function, right? I mean, GANs are highly popular, so people usually know how it works. So you have one model competing against another model, and they get better thanks to it. Like in this case, you have the customers or the user's model that's basically like learning what they have to learn. If you train like this sort of model to guide the model, you have two models that help each other, or actually one that coaches the other one, right? I mean, so it's fundamentally that's what the curation technology that we have tries to do, right? And so I absolutely don't believe in like uncertainty-driven active learning. I don't think it's a good idea in the industry.
Yeah, but you're talking about active learning so much, and there are so many benefits to it, but still what we have seen that it's not being used that widely. Why do you think what are the specific reasons to that?
You could, so I mean, I wrote an entire blog post on this, so you could definitely talk about this, but just to give you a few pointers, like what I like finding the right, you call that a querying strategy. Querying strategy is the technical term for like this selection process, right? I mean, so building the right querying strategy is a machine learning problem on its own. It's not for the faint of heart. In fact, usually I say there is a lot of similarity between active learning and deep learning 10 years ago. So if you remember like the early days of deep learning, people are like, this looks awesome, I'm gonna try that on my data set. They would give it a try for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, it wouldn't work, they would give up, and then they would proclaim deep learning is not helpful in my case, right? And so people like sort of like took a step back or whatever, when we all know today the problem wasn't that deep learning wasn't working, it's just tuning is hard. Back in the days, we didn't have like people didn't have expertise to tune it properly. There were no tools to like tune it properly, when today you do have like a significant number of tools, right? And yeah, basically like yeah, I mean, so I see the same problem with active learning now. Is like it takes a certain level of understanding. How do you tune the process? How do you know when the process needs to stop? How large the different batches, the different loops need to be, and so forth and so on. But then the other answers is like it requires, like, for example, like one of the problems we're trying to solve in the context of the wider data prep ops is basically like if you select data dynamically, you need to label data dynamically typically, right? And your typical labeling company out there is not built for agility or for speed, they are built for scale, right? I mean, so they will do a good job, hopefully, like if you send them 50,000 records, but if you have a process that selects data like by batches of 100 or 500 or whatever, they're like they are not gonna like there is like a minimum amount of time that they can take because they need to deploy internally like a project manager to do this and so forth and so on, right? I mean, so from an operational standpoint, it's
Yeah.
difficult. From a technical standpoint, it's difficult. Like you need to trust your labels because if some of your labels are wrong, the entire process is sort of like going to be biased. So it's sort of a dangerous process if you don't know what you're doing, right?
Yeah, I think that could be the blockage for the active learning not being used so widely.
Yeah.
So definitely it does make a lot of sense. Also, I had a curious question for you, Jennifer. Since you are such a great speaker, do you attend conferences? Do you speak at
Yeah,
conferences?
you know
Which
that's a biased question, right? Because like, look, you're gonna say like, yeah, absolutely. Like I actually kind of like missed like talking at conferences, like with COVID, like that was kind of a
oh yeah,
heartbreak for me and so forth and so on. But so yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of ODSZ. So I mean, I think in
wow,
2018 I gave like pretty much like talks at every single like ODSC session, like for the entire year. I did
wow.
the West one, the East one, the Bangalore one, and then the London one.
Wow.
So, so yeah, yeah.
So definitely you were everywhere, and big cheers to ODSC. I didn't know about that. I knew
Oh, you
you
know that.
are you speak at a lot of conferences. So the good news is definitely one where there's an in-person conference happening in the month of November in San Francisco. So again, we are back to square one, where in-person conference and virtual conferences from ODSC is happening. So that's a good news.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, I will definitely I'll definitely speak with the speaker team if they have you listed there. But that's great. Okay. What I wanted to touch base on an article actually that you wrote on social media about, obviously the solution to winning with AI wasn't to own entire stake, but to make integration of different tools easier. So could you
Yeah.
comment on that? We can definitely open that, but yeah, I want to
You
talk
could,
more
you
about it.
could like basically like the fundamental story is like basically like that's a deeper like ML ops, right? I mean, since we're talking about data prep ops as well, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
like fundamentally, I believe like there's been a lot of progress in the ML ops space where you have like an increasing number of companies that actually like sort of like streamline, right? When you think about what ML ops is like an attempt at streamlining some of the painful parts of
Yeah.
the machine learning lifecycle, right? I mean, and so basically like and you have so many like interesting companies like building like feature stores. You have labeling companies taking
Hmm.
like unique approaches to basically annotate data and so forth and so on for automated deployment, finding automatically like which sort of like model is gonna work better for a specific use case and so forth and so on. And so yeah, I mean, so basically like one of the people often ask me like basically like since there are so many MLOps company, who should I use, right? I mean, I think we're reaching the point where the market breaks down into different pieces. Like I think it's good to have people specialize in different things, right? I mean, so basically like I have a group of friends who have like a company like that does like builds a feature store, right? I mean, so feature store is basically like how you basically like streamline like the creation and the storage of like features which were developed by your data scientists and so forth and so on. They are super good at what they do. They wouldn't know how to do what we're doing. They wouldn't be necessarily like the right experts to like like figure out like how to efficiently deploy a machine learning model. So there are like amazing tools out there, and I feel like there are many teams that still feel like they don't need help. They're gonna do everything internally. And so like fundamentally my thought is this, right? It's like when you think about AI, what is AI trying to do? AI is essentially like you, as you said yourself, it's cliche, but this is what it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to like create or cause a machine to think as a human. Just think
Exactly.
about like fundamentally how crazy that sounds, right? We're trying to make computers think and behave just like us, right? I mean, so it's not an easy problem. I don't think it's a good idea to try to reinvent the wheel, right? I mean, and so basically like fundamentally I think there has to be more like communications across companies in terms of like how do I make it easy for you to use my product with yours so that people who
Right.
build models can just focus on building the models and figuring out like which data products they want to create, as opposed to figure out like where do I deploy this, how do I deploy this, which company should I go to. And so it's
So
still
true.
sort of like a huge mess out there. Like oftentimes like you talk to people, they don't necessarily understand like one of the problems we faced early is like, how are you different from like a labeling company? It's like, we don't do the labeling, or we do the labeling but we outsource the labeling, we do the curation part, but people are not necessarily educated to understand the difference.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is something which is making a lot of sense. But there was a question from Bharat that I would want to take. What are the common challenges, pain points you have faced trying to deploy ML models or ML ops challenges? How would you go about deploying some real-time application where input has to get processed by multiple models, thousands of models?
I mean, look, there is no easy answer to this. It depends on the
Exactly.
situation. What I usually say, right, is like basically like where like the way you answer this type of question is like, at first you don't. Usually what I tell people, like, if you don't know what tool to use, because like ML ops is actually very, very wide. Usually people see ML ops as being the last mile. So basically what you do to push models in production. For me, it's a wider space where you streamline different parts, right? I mean, so for example, there is this company like known as like Weights and Biases, which is pretty well known. Basically what they do is like they help people understand like the impact, or like basically like the behavior of the parameters in their models and so forth and so on, right? I mean, so that has nothing to do with deployment. It has to do with basically building the model, right? And so basically like you have ML ops companies helping you with the creation of the model, the tuning of the model, the deployment of the model, like we do, like the
Yeah.
preparation of the data and so forth and so on. What I usually say is like, you keep everything in-house in the beginning. You try to push everything to production to the best of your ability, and then at some point you're gonna realize, whoa, my pain points are here, here, and here, right? And then you take it like basically like for companies that are sort of similar to me. Usually like one of the best bets is like people in the same space. Like if you're a finance company or a fintech company, and basically what are other fintech companies actually using
Hmm.
out there, and you're basically like trying to fill in the gaps, right? I mean, so and you're not gonna need the same ML ops stack. I would really talk about ML ops stack, because like there are like so many different pieces to ML ops. You're not gonna need every single one of them. In
Yeah.
some cases, you don't need to annotate the data. You don't need to think about like finding the right labeling annotation company. In some cases, you're not gonna need to have sophisticated deployments, because your models are pretty simple, right? So it's just like take it step by step. Like I would take like a crawl, walk, run approach, where you identify the problems instead of trying to find a solution ahead of time, right? I mean, it's like really something that
Yeah.
fundamentally ML ops is here to like streamline the parts of the process that are too expensive, too complicated for your own company.
Very true. So, moving on, definitely I would want to know more about Electio. First things first, how did you come up with this name Electio? I know
That's like
yeah, I know there's a very good story, so I want the audience to know more about it too.
No, actually, so basically, like if you see my logo, like on my shirt here, you see the AL
Yeah.
is like in emphasis. So basically, like so, it's like I was kind of like brainstorming ideas when I started the company. It's like basically, how am I gonna call this company, right? And so AL actually stands for active learning. And so
Wow.
I actually did some research. I was like, I mean, I wanted an O at the end, because I wanted to do like, like how Amazon does like A to Z. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do alpha to omega. So I mean,
Wow.
and so basically like
Very thoughtful.
I came up, I just found like by doing some research that basically lectio in Latin meant selection.
Uh-huh.
So using active learning to select data is like IAL lectio, right? I mean, so basically like it's how we came
It's
up with the name. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a great first thing, very thoughtful. You've given that thought to the name. That what does AL mean, and then the Latin word comes in, and then A to O, so which is fantastic.
Mm.
So great work, Jennifer. There. So also now, let's talk a little about the Electio platform.
Yeah.
How does it do, and why should people use it? And if we can know more about it. Why
Yeah,
not?
no, sounds good. So I'm gonna have to explain at a very high level what data prep
Please do.
ops actually is, right? I mean, so basically, like, so we talked in depth about curation. So basically, like, fundamentally, like, one of the story started this way. It's like basically, like, for me, if you only need a part of the data, then everything else becomes easier, right? I mean, because if you only have to deal with 10%, so not only everything is cheaper, but like now some of the things you had to do at scale, you don't necessarily need to do at scale anymore, like the validation of the data, which you might have to do like automatically. Now we can sort of do manually and so forth and so on. If you need to train, like if you can train a model with only a fraction of the data, you can maybe train on back on your computer instead of using like AWS instances to make it happen, right? I mean, so like diminishing the scale makes everything easier. What I didn't foresee is like technically, like fundamentally, what we were doing was like selecting data dynamically, and our early customers would basically. So I mean, like the platform is like basically like set with like we have an SDK, as I explained, that basically sort of like orchestrates and like retrieves like the clues of the model remotely. That gets like taken back on our side, right? I mean, we build machine learning models with it, and so we have a UI which basically you would use to like we have like a pretty advanced dashboard where you can see like which fraction of my data was useful, why was it useful, like, and so forth and so on, right? And so
Yeah.
in the early stage of the company, we were essentially focused on the curation. I would tell people, we'll find which data helps, but then you have to go annotate that yourself if you need annotations, right? I mean, so basically like and our earliest customers would basically say like, okay, we're gonna go to Scale, we're gonna go to Labelbox or whichever company they were already using, right? And so if you show up with like to Labelbox with like 500 records, they're not gonna prioritize you, believe me, right? I mean, because they have other
Mm-hmm.
customers like who need to annotate 500,000 records. That's a lot more money. With your
Right.
500 records, you're definitely not their biggest problem, right? So the experience was actually pretty terrible because people would say like, okay, you told me what's useful, but now I have to wait for 6 weeks before anybody even returns to me like
Exactly.
my labels just for 500 labels. And so then I need to resume the process, and you're gonna give me the next 500. It's never gonna end, right? I mean, so basically it's like, oh, I think we have a problem. This is like you enter like in entrepreneur mode. It's like, what do I do now, because I have this amazing product
Exactly.
that doesn't sustain with the rest of the market. So coming from the labeling space, I had like partners, like I knew people, like the
Exactly.
BPOs basically who knew how to do data labeling. So typically BPOs are like groups of people who normally service like the big labeling companies over here. So I went to the same people or some of the same people and basically say like, look, we'll help you find work that's interesting to you, right? And we will basically like in exchange, if I send you 500 records, I want you to promise you're gonna work on that first, right? I mean, so we basically like set contracts where
Wow.
it's more dynamic. It's better for them because they also have predictability of what's coming up. It's not just like a spike of like 50,000 records they need to annotate like for the next month. It's like
Right.
500 like every couple of hours, which is like a lot more easy to manage for them, right? And basically, so what we started doing is like we started knowing that this company is absolutely amazing if you want fast and cheap like object detection annotations, but they are not so great for segmentation. This other
Mm-hmm.
company is really great for NLP. And so over time we started like sort of like creating like a recommendation system to basically say like, we know who's available in real time, we know what they are good at. We also provide feedback to them. It's like basically like you didn't get that job a couple of times because you're tiny more expensive than the other ones. And we provide our customer with the visibility, right? I mean, one of the problems people have with
Wow.
labeling companies is like you usually don't know ahead of time how much exactly you're gonna pay. So we basically
Right.
provide that to them. And so we sort of like created the agility. I actually like I started talking about this concept of agile data labeling. So this is what it is, right? On top of this, we also leverage like auto labeling when auto labeling can be used. And then we started creating like this feature where we have an anomaly detection system that identifies like which data might have been mislabeled. So if it's mislabeled, you can send that to the same labeling company, the ones that you think are faulty, or to another labeling company, which is like where the beauty of a marketplace actually comes at play, right? Because you're not
Right.
stuck with the same vendor forever if you're not happy, and you're not stuck with the same vendor if that vendor is busy, and you're not stuck with the same vendor if they're not like it depends on the project, right? I mean, like company A might be amazing for like sentiment analysis, but not so much for something else, right? I mean, or translation or whatever. So if you have a wide range of projects, like typically it doesn't make sense to be like signed up with the same solo vendor forever, right? And so basically, like now we have the entire system end to end where we do the versioning of the labels, the auditing of the labels. We find the right labeling company. We manage the relationship with them, right? I mean, we basically we automatically know what can be afforded to basically send to an auto labeling job or routed to a manual job and so forth and so on. On the UI, you can visualize your annotations. You can fix them yourself. If you fix them yourself, we consider this as a mistake. So basically, like we hold the labeling company that generated the labels accountable, right? For us, it's sort of unique because if you directly work with the labeling company, like the labeling company obviously has an incentive to tell you they did a better job than they actually did. We don't, right? I mean, so basically, like we don't have any fear, like say, like, you know what, they told you 95% labeling accuracy, but we measure 93, right? I mean, so we were gonna complain about that until they set it right and so forth and so on. So you have this entire flow, right? I mean, you can actually go on our website, like we have a little like animation of how this works. But basically, like it's basically like end to end. And so, what makes data prep ops like basically it's like ML ops and data prep had a baby, right? But basically, like fundamentally, click on the technology, like a drop down and go on platform workflow.
Yes.
Yeah, if that works. There you go. So you can basically like follow the flow here, but basically like this is the way that it works, right? And so yeah, I mean, so fundamentally, what makes what we do unique is like you prepare data at the same time you prepare your model, right? I mean, so it's like, and this is sort of like a completely new concept where people used to believe like you prepare your data and then you create your model, you train your model. This has a major flaw because you have to fit your model to your data and not the other way around, right? I mean, so basically like so what we are proposing is like basically there is no reason to do this. In fact, you should fit your data to your model just as much as you know, like it goes both ways, right? I mean, so it's sort of like this cycle where you prepare data in an optimal way for your specific so this is like you can go through like the entire process, but basically like it's a new concept where like the data prep step should be as high technology as the rest. People usually perceive that preparing data is like the unsophisticated part that they don't want to work on. So it's sort of like an answer to like the complaint of the market that people spend so much time on data preparation when they want to spend more time on modeling. So we can go back to focus on modeling, and we take care of the like I mean, data preparation is complicated. So this is basically like a fundamental tool and workflow that you can use. So to end out that to somebody else, right?
Yeah, I think it is actually solving the problem for the folks. And if anyone wants to actually use it, where can they actually go? And
So
is there a free trial?
this is like, I mean, we obviously like I mean, usually like we start with demos when like a company wants to start this. So I think please feel free to ping me or like basically like book a demo if you're interested. Now the other thing I'm going to say, like, which is you should definitely follow us like to keep track of this. But so we're just weeks away from like basically like we're going to release like a community version of the platform where you don't have the full automation, but actually we're trying to make it like a fun, like kind of approach and convince people you can build models with a fraction of the data. So basically like stay tuned, like this is a tool that's gonna come up soon. It will be fun, like basically like it's going to be a platform like sort of like a Kaggle for data curation where you can compete, like you can win t-shirts, you can win like a swag and so forth and so on, and you can compete against your friends for like how little data you had to use to actually train a specific model that like typically like is part of a competition. So follow us, it's coming up soon, and yeah, I mean, I hope everybody's gonna give it a try, and we hope to evangelize the idea that big data isn't the solution to all of the problems in AI and machine learning.
Big data versus smart data. I read this and I was so impressed by reading this. It's so informative and it's so to the point. So thanks for putting this together, and thanks for that fantastic explanation about the platform. Definitely one platform that I would definitely give it a try. Also, there was a quick question from Manisha about what's coming next? What's next coming up for Alectio?
Oh wow! So no, I mean, so this is like, I mean, look, I have like a lot of things coming up, which I don't necessarily want to display. But one of the
Yeah.
technologies I'm the most excited about is like we're just like currently like we're building a brand new technology which we recently like patented, which is actually like a brainchild of mine, which is basically like we call that data filtering. It's like you could call that meta active learning. It's like a
Wow.
one-shot active learning process where instead of finding useful data like incrementally, we have a one-shot prediction that says like this is useful and this is not. And so this is like this has tremendous application in the IoT space, right? I mean, and so basically the idea is like you deploy a data filter on the edge of like a drone, an autonomous vehicle, like or whatnot, right? It's telling
Yeah.
you in real time this data is going to matter to your model or not. And you can immediately decide which data you get rid of, which is solving a huge problem because many autonomous driving companies, for example, don't have enough storage on their vehicles. They need to transfer like data back to the cloud, and usually like this is a pretty tough problem to do in real time, right? I mean, so it's a so yeah, I mean we're bringing like new solutions to basically like streamline, reduce the pain points associated to. I mean, fundamentally that's what we do anyways, like create the perfect training data set for a specific use case, like fundamentally like trying to help people like save money and do things more efficiently. So there are a ton more features that we're actually
Fantastic.
like trying to bring like to solve all the pain points you would typically have with data preparation.
Can't wait for the next and upcoming things for Electio. So all the best for that, Jennifer. Let's not wait and quickly announce the winners now for 365 Data Science. I would just do the first draw. There are 24 entries that we have. So all the best to all the participants. Before I draw the last one, you can actually type in hashtag 365 Data Science. Congratulations, Chelsea. You're the first winner for the 365 Data Science annual subscription. Let's do a draw again very quickly. All right. Congratulations, Ajay. You both win 365 Data Science annual subscription. I'll be reaching out to you guys, but nevertheless this was super insightful. And Jennifer, we would want to, I'm sure the audience wants to know, if they want to reach out to you, if they want to learn more about active learning, data prep ops, about obviously your company Electio, where can they reach out, and how can you help them?
No, I mean we're super active, like specifically on LinkedIn, like a little bit on
Fantastic.
Twitter as well. Like basically, like we're creating like like case studies, like read like I write a lot about like thought leadership, like like in the space generally speaking. Whatever we write is always advertised on social media anyway, so you feel free to follow us. Like we have a newsletter which you can sign up to like through the website. So I mean it's absolutely, we're always happy like to educate people on like active learning curation, like less
Wow.
is more generally speaking. And yeah, I mean, no, it's a long journey, and so we know like we
Yeah.
need like a lot of people to like help us promote this, because I'm not gonna let like the big data industry win this one.
It's a healthy competition, and I think it will be fun watching your journey ahead and following Electio very closely. So, thank you again, Jennifer. Thanks everyone for asking such amazing questions. It was indeed one of the most interesting sessions. So, thanks, Jennifer, again, and see you next time on the Ravit
Thank
Show.
you for having me, and it was a lot of fun, Ravit.